Welcome to Real Clear Politics from Monday, November 3rd. I'm Andrew Walworth, and joining me are RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and RCP White House Correspondent Phil Wegmann. So, gentlemen, tomorrow is Election Day. We've been talking about the governor's races in New Jersey and Virginia, and the mayor's race in New York, and Prop 50 out in California. So lots of activity over the weekend, including President Barack Obama hitting the stump. Here's just a bit of his appearance in Virginia, campaigning for Abigail Spanberger.
But for ordinary families, costs haven't gone down, they've gone up. Partly thanks to this shambolic tariff policy. Young people trying to get a start in life are having a tougher time than ever finding a job. Entry-level hiring is down 16% from last year. Hundreds of thousands of federal employees, including a lot of people here in Virginia, have lost their jobs to pay for those billionaire tax cuts. We're talking about people who have dedicated their lives to public service, who make the country work.
So, Tom, there he is. He's in Virginia. He's talking about federal workers. That's a obvious thing, but he's really talking about Trump. He's sort of nationalizing the election. What do you make of the races we're talking about here? And what do you make of Obama? Do you think he's going to turn out more voters than otherwise would have come out?
You know, the interesting thing about Obama is if you look at his record, go back and look, when he took office after the 2008 election, they had, I think, 57 Democratic senators plus 2 independents who caucused with them. They had a 257-seat majority in the House of Representatives. They had a majority of governorships around the country and a majority of state legislatures. When he left office after the 2016 election, Democrats had lost, I think, 11 Senate seats. They were down to a 197-seat minority in the House of Representatives. They down to 19 governorships and had lost a majority of state legislatures around the country. Barack Obama was very good at getting himself elected and reelected, but he was not very good. Remember, in 2010, he campaigned furiously for Democrats, and they lost, I think, 9 Senate seats and 64 House seats. It was an absolute thumping. So this idea, and we saw all these news stories over the weekend about how great Obama was. And look, he's entertaining to the crowd. Democrats still love him, but is he going to move the needle? I'm not sure. I'm not sure there's any evidence to that. He'll definitely fill coffers. He'll generate some buzz. But in terms of the actual raw numbers of who's going to vote, people who are on the fence, independents, are they going to vote because Barack Obama is slamming Donald Trump? I mean, that really hasn't worked. So I think these races are pretty much baked at this point. And as you mentioned, just real quickly, I mean, the last couple polls that came out over the weekend have Spanberger up double digits. The Emerson poll actually had Jay Jones leading by 2 points over Jason Miyares. That's the first poll we've seen in the last 2 weeks that had him ahead. So maybe
that's the Attorney General's race,
that's
right?
The Attorney General race, right? With the text messages about, wishing death on his Republican opponent's wife and kids. So maybe Jay Jones is still in this thing. In New Jersey, it's about a 3-point lead for Mikey Sherill and Mamdani. There was an Atlas Intel poll that came out over the weekend, and the New York Post, as always did, had a great headline that said, "Not so fast." It had Mamdani and Cuomo running a race. Not so fast. 7 points they had that race. So there may be, an Atlas Intel. Look, I always say never make too much out of one single poll, but Atlas Intel was the most accurate pollster in 2024 and 2020 when it came to judging the electorate. So the fact that they're having this a 7-point race means there might be some late breaking momentum for Andrew Cuomo.
Yeah. And so, Phil, what are you looking at in these races in terms of the big question is, does this tell us anything about the midterms?
Yeah, we're looking at these to see if they're going to be a dress rehearsal for next year. The numbers that I'm looking at in particular are about 5.9% in New Jersey and 5.8% in Virginia. And the reason why is that's the margin that Donald Trump lost both of those states. If Democrats can run up the score and they blow that out of the water, maybe that's an indication of momentum on their end. But if their margin of victory is, around that number, then it shows that maybe they need to go back to the drawing board. Maybe they need to find something new. And quickly, I think that Tom pointed out that Barack Obama's magic doesn't exactly translate for some of these candidates, but it's telling that Barack Obama is back on the trail at this moment after being removed from office for a decade at this point, because Democrats, they don't have a leader right now. They remain in the wilderness, even at a moment when they really should be having Republicans on the defensive. I think those two things are the highlights of what I'm going to be watching for tomorrow evening.
Yeah, I tell you, two things interest me. One is the youth vote. I'm curious to see how that works, especially in New Jersey, but also the Hispanic vote will be interesting to watch, because Trump has made real inroads, as we know, among Hispanic voters. And we'll see if in a midterm, those people come out for the Republicans, or whether that was a one-time thing. That'll be important in New Jersey, where you got to say, the other thing is that these margins, it's looking, I guess, right now like the Democrats might sweep, including the Attorney General office. But if the margins are small, to Phil's point, Tom, does that tell us that maybe, does it tell us two things? One, that maybe the midterms won't be as strong for the Democrats as might be predicted otherwise. And secondly, that these sort of middle of the road, sort of old line liberal, sort of safe to women candidates are not really the future of the party, that the future of the party might be more with Mamdani and the left.
Yeah, look, both sides are going to take these election results and spin them as best they can to make their case for why they're, resurgent or whatever. It looks like if the polls are accurate, it looks like we'll have somewhat of a split decision. If Spanberger wins by double digits, that would be what you would expect from Democrats in a year where they're out of power, and Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. But if Mikey Sherill only wins by a couple of percentage points,
or loses, she still could lose,
or could lose. Absolutely. Ciattarelli's definitely within the upset sort of range there. If she loses, or if she wins by a point or two, and it's pretty close, Republicans will say, to Phil's point, we outperformed Trump. This New Jersey's turning red, and Democrats' message isn't selling here. So, and in New York, look, if Mamdani, if he somehow collapses, and I think he's still the heavy favorite based on everything that we understand there. But if he wins by 5 or 7 points, if Atlas Intel is right, and it's not 17 or 27, which is what some of the previous polls have been saying, I think Republicans are still going to say, look, Democrats have elected a radical in New York City, and they're going to hang him around the Democrats' neck, or try to anyway, for 2026. So we'll have to see how this works out. But both sides are going to take these results and do the best they can to make their case for why they're why it's a good situation for either party.
In 2028, Democrats, just to broaden the aperture, they are looking at these races for signals for how they're going to run their presidential campaigns, and specifically in the primary. I know that New York City and Virginia, that's apples to oranges. You've got a mayoral race versus a governor's race. But for some of these guys, like a Rahm Emanuel maybe, or Senator Alyssa Stefanik, they're wondering, okay, where is the energy? Is it with the centrists, or is it with this new crop of progressive Democrats? Where do they fit in? They've seen the signals from the campaign fundraising. Now they're actually going to get points on the board and get a real indication of what direction the party is going in. So you could see a case where, if the centrist does really well in Virginia, maybe they pump the brakes in sort of the move to the far left.
Yeah. getting back to Obama and who's is on the campaign trail and who's not on the campaign trail. I mean, clearly in Virginia, they like having President Obama there. They decided not to have, AOC isn't down there, for example. And does that tell us anything, Tom? And the other part of that, of who's on the campaign trail and who's not, is that Donald Trump did not come out and campaign in person for either of these Republican candidates. And I'm wondering what you make of that decision.
Well, Trump has always been he is a turnout machine for Republicans and for Democrats. And, Trump had kind of I mentioned Obama, Trump had a similar situation. When he's not on the ballot, even when he campaigns for folks, it helps move the needle for the MAGA base, but it also energizes Democrats. And so, his midterms in 2018, we're not, there was no red wave, particularly in the House of Representatives. So there was a story in the Wall Street Journal. Look, Jack Ciattarelli is not sort of distancing himself from Trump. He's not, as some Republicans did in, let's say, the 2018 type of environment where, Republicans were really trying to hold Trump, at an arm's distance. That's not what Ciattarelli's doing. And so it'll be interesting. And he's performing as well as he did, 4 years ago. And as we said, still has a chance to score an upset here. So Virginia's a bit of a different case. Winsome Sears has a bit of a different challenge in that state. So that's probably why Trump isn't playing there. And remember, Glenn Youngkin managed to win that race without getting Trump really involved either. And that was his strategy, and he managed to pull it off. But other Republicans have not done as well when they try to thread the Trump needle.
Yeah. Phil, I mean, is Trump a liability in a state like Virginia? I mean, if you're Sears, Winsome Sears, do you want to? I mean, she's pretty MAGA, and his run is pretty MAGA. But at the same time, do you really want Trump in your backyard?
Maybe not, especially if you're trying to appeal to some of these furloughed federal employees who blame Republicans for the shutdown. I think that we might be seeing a bit of discipline from Donald Trump and the political team at the White House. They know all of these dynamics about how he's a turnout machine for the Republican base, but also brings blowback from Democrats. There's going to be two teletown halls that are thus far private later this evening that Donald Trump's going to participate in. So maybe he tries to speak directly to the Republican base in both of these states. But what I find most curious about all of this is why we haven't seen former President Obama endorse Mamdani. That's what I actually think is sort of most counterintuitive, because if you look at Mamdani, I mean, here's another, skinny kid with a funny last name, to quote the former president. It seems almost perfect for an endorsement at the last moment.
I mean, they really did sort of finesse that, right? So Obama called Mamdani, and it was reported in the Times that, Obama offered support and guidance, not an endorsement, but support and guidance, which again can be read in a variety of different ways depending on how I'm sure Mamdani is telling people that, yeah, Obama's supporting me. He's behind me 100%. And other folks are able to say, look, Obama didn't endorse him. He's keeping his distance. So they tried to fudge that a little bit.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand why they fudged it. I mean, if you're Obama and you're looking at the midterms and you're looking beyond that to 2028, what if Mamdani actually runs the city into the ground, like a lot of people say? I mean, those bites would come back to haunt him as he goes out to endorse other people. I mean, there is a real question, I think, within the Democratic Party as to how smart it is to get behind a Democratic socialist in New York City and make him the new face of the party. Obama must be sort of making that calculation like everybody else.
And we've seen President Obama play in these types of close races previously during the 2016 primary and 2020. Clearly he favored candidates not named Bernie Sanders. There's been a hesitation to go, too far to the left on this.
Or Joe Biden.
Or Joe Biden,
Right.
that moderate centrist who ended up governing very much as a progressive. I think that, it does kind of go back to this constant frustration of Democrats, which is that Barack Obama is very good at protecting his own brand, but he doesn't always deliver for the party.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, tomorrow is election day. We'll be back to talk about that more then. Hey, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Phil, and we'll be back with more right after these words.
Let's pause for a moment and talk about what's happening beyond the headlines. While the stock market gets the spotlight, there's a quieter shift that's happening with real implications. Central banks are building gold reserves. The global demand for hard assets is rising, and policymakers here at home are laying the groundwork for major economic changes. American Alternative Assets is staying ahead of that curve. Their new report is called Gold's Next Move, and it shows you how to protect your savings using a gold IRA and why now is a strategic moment to act. You will also get their wealth preservation guide, and you can learn how to claim up to $10,000 in free silver. Visit tomlovesgold.com or call 855-450-GOLD. That's tomlovesgold.com or 855-450-4653. Do it today.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and with Phil. And guys, Donald Trump gave a long interview to 60 Minutes last night. Longer than 60 Minutes, as it turned out. He sat down with Norah O'Donnell. The extended interview, which they ran, is an hour and 13 minutes long, although that was lightly edited as well. So I think
I saw someone making a joke about wanting to sue Donald Trump or sue CBS for editing that interview the way Trump sued them for editing the Harris interview.
That was Minority Leader Chuck Schumer who made that joke.
That's right. That's right.
So, he really covered the waterfront. It's a good example of the weave, if you can sit through it, which I have. Tom, they talked about China, Venezuela, AI, Ukraine, tariffs, and they did talk about the filibuster as well. And here's just a little clip of the president talking about his view on the filibuster.
The Democrats will do it in the first week in office. The Democrats, and I told that to John, and I get along with them great. We've had a great relationship. And I also know there are other Republicans that feel the other way, and I understand that too, but they're wrong. The Democrats will do it. If they get into power, and someday I guess they will, who knows? It's hard to believe when they have men and women sports, open borders, open everything, a transgender for everyone. The Democrats will do it in their first day in office.
So that was John Thune when he says John in that clip, Tom. But what do you make of the interview? And what about that point in particular?
Well, there's so much we can talk about this interview, as you mentioned. I mean, he was all over the place. But as regards the filibuster, Thune came out and said, look, we're not doing this. And there was pushback across the board from Republicans. This is the second time. We talked about this, I think, last week and talked about how, Richard Porter, who'd been on the show, wrote an article saying, look, this is exactly what the Democrats want. They want Republicans to do away with the legislative filibuster and do their dirty work for them. The counter argument to that is basically what Trump just said, which is, look, the Democrats are going to do this anyway. So why should Republicans be, sort of hands off and unilaterally disarm and struggle to get things passed in the Senate and have things blocked? And then if they lose the Senate, if and when they lose the Senate, there's no question that Democrats would turn right around and nuke the filibuster and pack the Supreme Court and do all sorts of stuff. And look, I think there's merit to that argument. Democrats have said, and we've seen this in a lot of different places where Democrats have very much contemplated doing that and considered it and think they need to, they particularly think they need to do it now to reverse all of the things that Trump has done, particularly in, his second term. So I think it is a legitimate point, a legitimate threat. But I don't know that that he's going to convince enough Republicans to go along with him. He might, but he also said in that same interview that, he thought the shutdown was going to, Democrats were going to have to capitulate. They're going to have to vote on this. So he thinks that they're going to, it sounded like he thinks they're going to get enough Democrats to come over to break the filibuster so they don't have to nuke it. But then he also argued, well, I still want to nuke it anyway, or I think we should nuke it. So I wasn't quite clear on that. But look, he wants to do this, even though it's something that, at least for now, his party's resisting.
Yeah. Phil, when I pulled that clip in part because we've talked about the filibuster on the show, and there is a sort of feeling that John Thune sort of knocked it down. It's not, most Republicans, senators seem to feel like the filibuster is a good thing for the reason that Tom mentioned. It's sort of this prophylactic over the Senate body as a whole. But, it struck me in hearing that, this often happens where Trump says something and people go, that'll never happen. And pretty soon it's part of the conversation. And
then it happens.
A couple months later, it happens. I mean, how does the White House view this?
Right now, the White House knows that Democrats know that Donald Trump very much doesn't like the filibuster. Remember, back to his first term, he was constantly raging against this thing. And so this is a situation where I think that Donald Trump is serving as sort of the bad cop. My White House sources call this a shot across the bow. As you saw in that exchange with Norah O'Donnell on 60 Minutes there, he clearly knows that there's some resistance to this within his own party. And I think that's because he might not be looking to political life after 2028. That's an open question, but Republicans certainly are. They know what life is like in the minority. And the counterfactual here, to Tom's point is, yes, there are a lot of Democrats who do want to go nuclear, who do want to get rid of the filibuster, but they didn't do it when they were in control during the Biden era. And so I think that is sort of the maybe saving grace to this parliamentary procedure that Trump does not have an appreciation for.
Phil, do we know how J.D. Vance feels about nuking the filibuster?
That is a great question. I think that he's probably talked about it previously. I don't know top of mind, but I think that there are some Republicans who might gripe in private that, the former vice president who was there for just about a year and a half often voted more often with Democrats than Republicans. So that might be something to look into.
Yeah. It just seems if you get back to divided government, the Democrats do take the Senate, or it's the other way around. I mean, if you're the president, just think in terms of being the president. Do you want the Senate to not be filibustered? I mean, it would seem to me that if you're the president, especially if you're not in the majority, which you may not be, you kind of like the fact that the filibuster is there. It sort of puts a little hobble on the Senate. There's so many ways to view this as who wins and who loses if you don't have the filibuster.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you don't have total control, the president's veto would still be the backstop, right, for divided government. But if you had a situation like Biden had, and now Trump has, where they have control of all, the House, the Senate, and the White House, there would be nothing that would, virtually nothing that would stop. I mean, you've seen, obviously, if the margins are slim, you could have a couple of defectors in the House, for example, throw a monkey wrench in the whatever the plans are. But if you did have unification, among the caucuses, you can do a lot with just one extra vote. So, but what's interesting, the reason I asked the question about J.D. Vance is he'd be the one who might have to potentially live with this situation, for better or worse. I mean, if Republicans manage to hold on, that could be a real boon for a Vance administration. But if not, it could be a different story.
Well, yeah. And also let's realize what kind of Pandora's box we're talking about here. If the Republicans get rid of the filibuster, if they go nuclear, right, as some Democrats certainly seem to want them to, we're talking about a simple majority, maybe taking up questions of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, this could throw a lot of things into flux very quickly. Yes, there would be the backstop of the president, but you could foresee a situation where both of these parties try taking massive swings in a short amount of time. Maybe that gets Congress to actually start doing their job, maybe actually having a debate instead of just passing these massive funding bills at the end of the year. But this would be a revolution in American government if the filibuster was to go away.
Yeah. And the other thing is that, okay, you can't gerrymander the Senate. right? I mean, you're basically but what you could do if you're the Democrats, you could add a couple new states. You could put DC and Puerto Rico. So if you added 4 relatively safe Democratic Senate seats to the Senate without you get rid of the filibuster, you add those states. I mean, then maybe it's the Senate
and 4 more seats to the Supreme Court to 13.
I'm thinking back to the day that then Minority Leader Mitch McConnell sat there in the Senate and watched as Majority Leader Chuck Schumer got rid of the filibuster for these lower court nominees. He gave a speech and he said to Schumer, as Schumer staff were popping champagne off of the Senate floor, you will rue the day that you have done this. You went nuclear on these lower court nominees. It is going to come back on you. This is going to be a problem for you. And then what did we see? They went nuclear for Supreme Court justices. This thing is a slippery slope. And the thing about slippery slopes is they're hard to get off of. But, I think to the larger point, there are some Republicans who are sympathetic to the argument of Donald Trump there. Senator Ted Cruz, for instance, he previously told me, I think this was years ago, that he was frustrated with all of these parliamentary procedures and niceties being a one-way ratchet on Republicans. Democrats seem to blow through the stop signs, but then Republicans, they only take it back so far. So there's appetite for it. But again, I mean, this thing really upsets the apple cart. We could see a radically different functioning of government.
Yeah. Tom, like I say, that was just one thing that he talked about. He talked about a lot of other things. Anything jump out at you that was particularly interesting?
Well, I mean, probably the newsiest thing. I mean, he talked about Xi and rare earths, and I thought that was interesting and also very important. But probably the newsiest thing was the ICE stuff, right? He was asked, Norah O'Donnell asked about these ICE raids and the deportation stuff, and have they gone too far? And he said, no, I don't think they've gone far enough, which, I'm sure made liberal heads explode all across the country. I mean, we just had an episode here over the weekend in my hometown of Evanston which made national news, where you had ICE agents that were being followed by someone. And they, according to the protesters' version of events, the ICE agents, they say they swerved in front of the car and slammed on the brakes and caused the accident on purpose so they could jump out and then beat the crap out of some people. I'm not sure that's actually what happened, but one of the people did go to the ICE, it was like an SUV, and open the back door and try and let one of the people that ICE had taken into custody out and get them, away. And so that person got thrown to the ground and put handcuffed and thrown away. So it's been a real potent issue for Democrats, particularly those that are running for Congress here in the state of Illinois, but all over the country. And Trump was not backing off at all. I mean, he really did. I was a little bit shocked by that, but maybe I shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
I don't know if the response to these ICE raids has been as bad as Republicans imagined that they would be. I remember during the campaign, J.D. Vance is forecasting that as a deportation effort ramps up, there's going to be hysteria. There's going to be all sorts of polling that shows that this is the worst thing for Republicans. And in an environment where we had lived through, you guys remember the crying girl picture that was on the cover of Time magazine during family separation in Trump's first term? That was a news cycle that just didn't seem to stop. It was wall-to-wall coverage. I feel like thus far, we haven't seen Trump's polling drop precipitously because of this issue. The media coverage, yes, there have been some pretty egregious moments, from ICE that have gotten coverage, but for the most part, there hasn't been a massive backlash in the way that I kind of expected. Maybe, as these operations uptick and we do see ICE continue to question American citizens, continue to enter job sites without a warrant, maybe it could tip in the other direction. But I just haven't seen the massive backlash that I think I would have if it was 2018.
Yeah.
I suspect too, because I live in Evanston and Chicago area. I mean, I'm flooded with, Mayor Johnson and J.B. Pritzker, but also Gavin Newsom's been saying this. this, they keep saying, well, ICE, they're terrorizing these communities, they're zip tying kids, they're disappearing black and brown people. I mean, this is the narrative that they are pushing out. And I think, again, I think this is also, Phil, and I talked about this before in a different context, but the different information bubbles that we're in now, there's a whole narrative on the left. And if you live in that and that information bubble, you are convinced that is exactly what's happening. And then there's the, information bubble on the right where, is more about, threats against ICE agents are up 1,000%, and all of this stuff is manufactured to make ICE look as bad as possible, and they're not doing these things. So maybe that's part of the explanation for why it hasn't been as widespread nationally as you might have expected.
It's certainly an issue. At the same time, I think that Democrats are going through their own soul searching about what happened during the Biden era. I mean, Neera Tanden on this program told us that it was a mistake for Biden not to get ahead of this crisis. So I wonder if that's blunted it a bit. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. In the bubbles, this is constant.
Yeah. Well, Phil, you brought up the polls. So we do have some new presidential approval polls, Tom, as well as some generic ballot for the Congress. What do the new polls say?
Well, I mean, you had a CNN poll that came out over the weekend and a couple others that showed Trump at his lowest approval rating of his second term, and that is where he stands in the RealClearPolitics average. He's at 43.7%. His disapproval rating is at a high for his second term as well. He's at like 55, 54, something like that. So, you look at him on the graph and it's kind of, it's a decent sized drop, especially when you're talking about an average of polls that's anywhere from 8 to 10 polls. Now, I posted this and a bunch of folks on the right are like, oh, these polls are all, manufactured junk and they don't reflect reality. Fine, you could argue that maybe with a couple of the polls, but when you're talking about in the aggregate, it's definitely showing something. And I think Trump has taken a bit of a hit, whether it's on the government shutdown or whether it's on the ICE stuff. He is not doing as well, at least in this latest round of polls, as he had in the past. Now, I would also caveat that by saying, and this is the other metric that we keep track of, is even despite that slide over the last week or two, Trump is still polling at or above where Barack Obama was at this point in his term. Barack Obama was at 43.5%. So this idea that Trump is somehow like the least well liked president in modern history is not true, and it hasn't been true for some time. I mean, Trump's way higher this time around in this second term than he was in the first term in terms of his approval ratings.
Yeah. And what about the generic congressional vote? Because that's another one that we keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the NBC News poll that came out over the weekend had Democrats +8 in the generic ballot. So pretty big number, especially, and we talked about this before too, especially given where the Democratic, favorability ratings and the Democratic brand in general has kind of been in the tank. And yet they've led these generic congressional ballots. And just for people who don't know, that's the question that every pollster asks, and they all ask it the same way, which is, if the election were held today, would you vote for the Democrat or Republican for Congress? No names attached, and obviously the election's not today, but it gives you a sense of how the public is feeling about these respective parties. And so despite the fact Democrats, their brand is kind of in the toilet, they're still preferred to Republicans on this question when they're asked about, who they're going to vote for Congress in 2026. So, I mean, that gives you a sense of the power of being the out party. I think that's one, and that's historically, pretty well established. But it's unusual. Usually you don't see that gap between, the favorability rating and then these big numbers that they're getting in terms of the generic congressional ballot.
I think, though, in terms of the RCP average, it's 3.6. It's not
correct.
8, so
yeah, no. I was just speaking of the NBC poll, but still, plus 3.3 in the aggregate is still pretty good for a party that, hasn't been very well received.
Yeah. So Phil, the White House, do they watch these numbers carefully? Do they care? Everyone says, "Oh, we don't look at the polls," but
and they're all lying.
What's really going on?
They're definitely looking at these polls. There was hope that with the passage of one big, beautiful bill, that would give Republicans something to campaign on. Obviously, you can pick and choose what you like and don't like in that massive piece of legislation. Right now, we're seeing the fruits of that in the government shutdown over the Affordable Care Act and some of the subsidies in the Biden era extension that was taken away. What I think that a lot of Republicans right now are worried about is what happens with the economy if there is a recession and we see inflation, continue to rise. Then that's going to be trouble. And what I've heard from some operatives and some folks, behind the scenes in the Republican Party generally, is that there's a fear that perhaps Donald Trump is making the same mistake that the Biden administration did on inflation. You had the Biden administration come out and say, we're dealing with this inflation. We've seen a lot of progress. What do you mean that your Thanksgiving dinner is going to be that much more expensive? We're headed in the right direction. In that interview with 60 Minutes, Donald Trump said, hey, we have prices totally under control. The only thing we have to deal with now is the price of beef. That's not the case. Yes, gas is much cheaper, and there has been, some progress in the right direction. But everyday Americans are still feeling the pinch. And so when you have Trump make these grandiose promises, yes, those promises sell when he is about to do something. But now voters, they can judge. And some of these, voters who came into the GOP tent in 2024, they're going to look around. They're still going to vote their checkbook, if anyone actually still has checkbooks. And, maybe they say, hey, I like cheaper gas, but there hasn't been enough progress elsewhere. And maybe they rebuff Republicans.
Yeah, we may have to update that and say people vote their Venmo or something. We may need to do
their Venmo.
Anyway,
their Apple Cash.
Their Apple Cash. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Phil Wegmann, and we're going to be back with more right after this. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom and Phil. And guys, big week this week. On Wednesday, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in these two challenges to President Trump's power to impose these sweeping tariffs. The question is whether he has the authority to enact them using executive orders, which he says are justified because the country was in an emergency situation last February when he brought these about. Here's what Trump said on 60 Minutes about how he viewed the stakes in this case.
It would be a very sad day for the United States of America. We're making a lot of money. We're respected again all over the world. We have great national security. Let me give you an example. With China, they were, very strongly threatening us, frankly, with the rare earths. And then I said, well, if you're going to play that card, I'm going to put a 100% tariff on over and above what you're already paying, which was 55%, which was very high. A lot of money coming in, tremendous money like we've never seen. I'm going to put a 100% tariff on everything over and above. And you know what happened? We got a phone call 20 minutes later. We'd like to talk.
So, Phil, this has got to be at the White House sort of the number one thing they're worried about, it would seem to me, because as Trump pointed out, that his entire foreign policy, the way he describes it, is sort of built around threatening people with these tariffs and making them sort of come to heel. If he loses this tariff power, that's his big stick, isn't it?
This big stick. And what do all of these nations that entered into trade deals do with the United States? Do they come calling once again and say, hey, let's take a closer look at the terms of that agreement? Probably. Previously we had Trump say that the country would go to hell if he lost this authority. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the United States would be embarrassed, but that's the risk of moving forward with this authority when traditionally tariffs are supposed to be within the realm of Congress. We do know, though, that Donald Trump himself will not be at oral arguments at the Supreme Court on Wednesday. He's not going to head back into the courtroom, but all eyes are on these arguments. All eyes are on this case. The White House, they insist that they do have some authorities in the bag that they could use to try and shore up the new tariff schedule. But it would be night and day. They knew the risk of going it alone, and now they are rolling the dice to see if the schedule remains.
Yeah, and we should say that Wednesday they hear oral arguments. The decision could take months, could take years, who knows? But it does seem like all of Washington will be focused, Tom, this Wednesday on the Supreme Court and the arguments here.
Right, and the Trump administration believes that the court is going to side with them based on the fact that they are invoking national security, right? The previous precedents of the court in these cases revolved around domestic issues with regard to tariffs, and they're saying, look, because this is national security, the president has this authority, and they're hoping the court side. The other argument they're making, which falls into the category of, better to beg forgiveness than ask permission, is they're saying, look, we've already done all these deals. It would be a detriment to our national security to have to go back and unwind all of these deals that the president has already made. So I don't know if that's going to have any sway with the court as well. That's more of a sort of novel argument that you can't undo this because we've already done it. So we'll see whether the court. Now, we did have a vote in the Senate, a resolution that passed with the help of some Republicans, basically saying, look, this is authority that Congress has, not the president. But it was a non-binding resolution, so it doesn't mean anything. So, but this is a big deal for Trump. I mean, he has built his entire, a lot of his entire second term around tariff policy and the way that he's used tariffs on the economy and in foreign policy. And so it would be a huge blow if the Supreme Court decides and says that what he's been doing has been unconstitutional.
Yeah.
And it'd be a huge blow, just to bookend with our earlier discussion about the filibuster. It would be a huge blow to sort of the parliamentary system that has developed here, where you don't have Congress necessarily debating every provision. Instead, they're taking their cues from Donald Trump. You have Republicans in both chambers saying, well, hey, he has a mandate because of his win in 2024. Of course, those individual members of Congress, they also have a mandate because they were elected. But thus far, we've Republican problem, but we've seen both of them give us so much authority to the administration rather than safeguarding their own authority. So if the Supreme Court rules against the administration, well, then maybe we're back to a more original constitutional form of government, at least on this question of tariffs.
Yeah, but isn't that sort of the question here? I mean, there's an institutional question, which is all this power sort of gets sort of sucked up by the White House as the Congress sort of refuses to do its job. At least that's one argument. And that these kinds of things, if the Supreme Court sort of pushes back on this, here's what I think might happen. If the Supreme were to push back, it would force Congress to actually start doing its job. And you might sort of right the ship a little bit in terms of the balance of power between the three branches. I guess that's a possibility, but did those Supreme Court see it that way?
I love you. You're a dreamer.
Well, Carl Cannon isn't with us today, so someone has to.
Someone's got to be Pollyanna. All right.
No chance of that.
No chance.
So you, what do you think the Supreme Court will do, Tom? Sounds like you're making a prediction here.
No, I'm not. My prediction is that Congress won't reassert its authority in any way. I think it's in some ways it has neutered itself, and that's a process that's been going on for a long time. And Democratic presidents, right? Barack Obama, I've got a pen and a phone, I'm going to use it. Joe Biden, executive orders. Donald Trump. I mean, the executive branch has been more than happy to sort of arrogate all this power to itself, and Congress has been more than happy, because of the way it's been polarized and dysfunctional, to just sort of slough it off. And I don't know that that's, it hasn't been like this real tug of war. I don't know that Congress has, those muscles have atrophied. I don't know that they have enough to pull it back their way.
Wow. Well, Phil, speaking of tug of wars, I want to talk about the Heritage Foundation, which is this Washington think tank. It looms large in conservative politics for a number of reasons, but really sort of in the hot seat, I should say, not the hot tub. I think they wish they were in the hot tub this week. And you have a piece on this on the front page of RealClearPolitics today. What is going on at what used to be Ronald Reagan's favorite think tank?
What's happening is that Ronald Reagan's favorite think tank is becoming the think tank of Pat Buchanan. This fight at the Heritage Foundation, which you noted is hugely influential in conservative circles, has to do with the direction of the conservative movement. And in many ways, this is a dress rehearsal for what the conservative movement and the Republican Party is going to look like when Donald Trump exits stage right. At issue here is Heritage's relationship with Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson did an interview last week with Nick Fuentes, who is a millennial white supremacist. This is someone who has praised Hitler and denied the Holocaust. And in that interview, Tucker Carlson didn't really push back. This was a controversy on the right. There are a lot of people who disfavor Tucker Carlson, but where Heritage enters the frame is Kevin Robertson released this video on Thursday. And Kevin Roberts said, look, we are not going to yield to pressure to cancel Tucker. But then he also said, we're not going to cancel Nick Fuentes, even though we abhor a lot of his arguments. This has led to all sorts of consternation. You have dissension in the ranks at Heritage, with staffers who normally speak with one voice now breaking into two camps, those saying, hey, this is a bridge too far, and then others taking seriously the argument that Roberts laid out to RealClearPolitics on Saturday, which was, yes, we abhor what Nick Fuentes says and does, but we're not going to seek to cancel him because there are millions of disaffected young men who listen to him. And instead, what we're going to do is we are going to abhor his arguments. We're going to treat with them seriously, knock them down, and appeal to these younger disaffected men. But this has led to a massive food fight over there at Heritage. There's questions of whether or not Roberts is going to remain in that position. I think that he will, but there's a food fight over there, and it's not just inside DC baseball. It has implications that portend to the future of the Republican Party and the conservative movement.
And Roberts, of course, is the president of the Heritage Foundation.
Yes.
And I read today, or maybe it's in your piece, that he removed his chief of staff.
That's right.
Which seemed to be sort of like just seemed odd to me, because I mean, here he is. He's the guy who sort of started this thing, and okay, I'm going to fire this guy over here, and that's supposed to solve it. It just seems odd to me.
Someone had to fall on the sword. That news was broken by National Review before I could publish, so good on them. But we have seen these messy fights at Heritage previously. Back in 2016, 2017, former South Carolina Senator Jim DeMint, he was running that organization and then forced out. They had interim president Kay Cole James, who was there for a moment. And all of this, you might not recognize these names, but they are having the debate over there at Heritage in miniature over the direction of the Republican Party. And perhaps this is coming too late. You have some of these researchers over there. I've heard some of them are looking for new jobs. But it seems that, the party has moved in a new right direction. Heritage has moved in that direction as well. And this is, an ongoing fight for the soul of the Republican Party. I think what has generally happened, as has been explained to me, is you have Donald Trump entering in 2016, and he puts up for debate all of these conservative principles about things like trade, immigration, foreign policy. And there are some, on the new right, folks like J.D. Vance, Senator Josh Hawley, who say, hey, Republicans got it wrong when they were in favor of limitless immigration, when they went to war in the Middle East. And that's a debate that I think Republicans are willing to have. But what they're not willing to do is, allow some of these folks who truly are on the fringe, like a Nick Fuentes, like a Candace Owens, to have a seat at the table. And one thing that I thought was remarkable from our interview with Roberts is he said, hey, if you look at Nick Fuentes, that is an indication that Republicans truly do have an anti-Semitism problem, particularly with young men. We have to treat with it and knock this down. But there are a lot of people who are big mad that he's not just, sort of exiling Nick Fuentes. And they don't seem sympathetic to his argument that, hey, we need to sort of rehabilitate a lot of his audience and fans.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I mean, we're all for big tents, but gosh, can the Republican Party really need the anti-Semitic vote so much that they're not willing to sort of get tough with someone like Nick Fuentes?
No, and look, I don't know Nick Fuentes. Like, I never really paid attention to him
Right.
and hadn't really even heard of him until, relatively recently. Um, and I'm not aware of everything that he's said, but part of what people are upset about is that Tucker Carlson, had him on and sort of
Platformed him.
mainstreamed him. Yeah,
Right.
platformed him and made him sound reasonable and all these things. Um, so look, there's definitely an issue of anti-Semitism. The other side of this coin, and so we ran two X posts on Real Clear Politics this morning, sort of juxtaposing these two questions. On one side of the argument is Professor Robbie George, who's a member of the Heritage Board, and is basically, aghast that Kevin Roberts decided to, not he wants folks like Nick Fuentes. He wants a bright red line drawn. They have to be, shunned and ostracized and all of that. And then we have a piece by Robert Barnes, who's a right-wing lawyer, does a podcast, and he talks about, look, there's this thing that's going on with sort of younger Republican MAGA millennials that is that is part of, I think, what Phil was saying. When Trump came on the scene, he upended all of this orthodoxy on Republican foreign policy about, spreading democracy abroad and all these things. And part of that was asking this question about Israel. Should we have sort of this special relationship with Israel? Should we be sending them billions and billions of dollars every year? What are we getting out of this relationship that makes it worthwhile? That's what Tucker says, and that's what part of his discussion with Nick Fuentes is. He was saying, look, I've been asking these questions and I've been attacked, and now I've been, to even their gripe is that to even ask those questions at all is to be considered and labeled an anti-Semite, right? And be out of bounds. And they think that's wrong. Look, I think that's part of this debate, and I'm not sure that that's totally outside. I mean, I think that's a debate that Republicans probably should be having. It's a legitimate debate, in my opinion. Now, saying that is not to excuse or Nick Fuentes, because like I said, from what I've heard about him recently, he said some really nasty stuff, but he does have a lot of followers. So I'm not saying that Republicans need to your question, Andy, it's not necessarily a question of, well, we need to embrace anti-Semitism in order to win these people over and get their votes. I think at the core of it is a question of what's our relationship with Israel? What should it be moving forward, and should it be as it's been in the past?
Phil, it's a very subtle distinctions Tom's making there. They might be too subtle for the radio, but
I don't think, really, you think that's too subtle?
No. But I just wish we had more time in the segment to explore it further. But I want to give Phil the last word here. What happens next at the?
There was a time when Republicans said that Israel should be the 51st state. In the last couple of years and recent months, there has been this debate over, actually, should we question Israel? Does the United States need to be as cozy to that democracy in the Middle East? And I think that question has inflamed a lot of folks. What we are learning, though, is that there are no more gatekeepers on the right. If you wanted to have someone who was going to police this movement in the same way that Bill Buckley did with National Review and the John Birch Society, no one has that authority right now. The Wall Street Journal editorial board can't do it. National Review certainly can't. And for a while, there was a hope that maybe Heritage could. But at this moment, I think that the curtain's been torn. All can freely enter in and have this debate. And right now, this is massively significant. You have, two twin pillars of the conservative sort of commentariat, especially on the younger side. You've got Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro, and these guys are duking it out and fighting it. And I think that, at the end of this, we're going to figure out, what does the GOP tent actually look like? Because right now, Donald Trump, he can hold up that tent pole. But when he exits, We'll see if it's possible for a JD Vance or a Marco Rubio to do. And right now, I think that generally what Republicans are failing to do is realize that they're winning. I mean, they're in control of Congress, they're in control of the White House. They have, the wind at their back, at least after 2024 when they won the popular vote. And yet there is this idea that there cannot be any enemies to the right, that because the left is such a threat to them and their movement, that they have to, at least allow some of these unsavory folks at the fringes. I think that what Roberts is trying to do and what Heritage has tried to do, although a lot of it has been lost in translation, is they are saying, look, we don't like Nick Fuentes, but we have to, save some of these millions of disaffected young men. And what Roberts told me on Saturday is that he thinks that the audience of Nick Fuentes and the audience of Tucker Carlson is essential to the future of the GOP.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, we're going to have to leave it there. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've been talking with Tom and Phil. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great evening.